Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sits across from the president. White supremacist threats hang between them. One question will change everything. Crockett leans forward in her office chair, the weight of recent threats barely visible beneath her composed exterior. Her hands rest steady on the mahogany desk, fingers interlocked with precision that suggests hours of preparation. Behind her, a security officer watches the door. The burden of recent white supremacist threats to her Washington, D.C. office seems almost physical in the room. "Mr. President," she begins, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who's perfected political combat. "Given recent events, do you take responsibility for the hostile climate that's led to threats against members of Congress?" The question lands cleanly, sharp, and precise, cutting through the false casualness that has defined many of these encounters. Trump shifts in his chair across from her, that familiar relaxed posture he uses to appear unaffected. His suit jacket hangs slightly crooked, a small detail that makes his defensive position more obvious. "I'm not responsible for anything," he says, his voice carrying that blend of dismissiveness and aggression that's become his trademark. People have the right to disagree with their elected officials. That's what this country represents. But there's something different in his tone today, a slight hesitation absent in previous encounters. The room feels it immediately. Security details exchange glances that speak volumes. Crockett's eyes narrow slightly, not with anger, but with sharp focus, like someone who's spotted weakness in an opponent's defense. Her voice maintains professional calm, but there's steel beneath it now, including the right to threaten their lives. The question lands like a sharp slap, unexpected and impactful. The shift in the room's energy is immediate and noticeable. Trump's casual demeanor changes under pressure. His hands, resting loosely on his knees, suddenly clench. Security officers move closer to their positions, professional instincts activating. "Those are different things," Trump says, but his cadence has changed completely. Where before his words flowed with arrogant confidence, now they stumble slightly. The first crack appears in his armor, small but unmistakable. A moment of silence stretches between them like a taut wire. Crockett doesn't rush to fill it. She's learned the power of waiting, of letting discomfort build until it becomes unbearable. Then when silence reaches its peak tension, "Are they?" Power shifts begin in microseconds. The room feels it like air pressure before a storm. This isn't going where anyone expected. Trump's entire stance shifts now, defense mechanisms activating like a computer booting under emergency protocols. His voice takes on that defensive edge that always precedes major escalation, the tone of someone who's realized they're in deeper water than expected. The calculated casualness from moments before evaporates. "Look, I don't control what unstable people do," he says, his words coming faster now, losing the measured pace he'd tried to maintain. "I've said things, yeah, but I'm a politician. We all say things. You can't blame me for what some unbalanced individual decides to do." But Crockett's response cuts through his protection like precision and devastating in its accuracy. "You called for the termination of the Constitution. You said members should be hanged. You urged people to fight like hell. Are these not direct invitations to violence, Mr. President?" Her voice remains perfectly controlled and professional, but every single word lands with significant impact. The transformation in Trump's demeanor is immediate and dramatic. His response comes too fast, too loud, the volume spike betraying the growing crack in his defense like a fault line appearing in an earthquake. "Those were just figure of speech. Everyone knows that. I'm talking about the political process, not—" His gesture cuts off mid-sentence. The nervous energy of someone who's just realized their trap beginning to show in every movement. Crockett doesn't flinch. She leans forward slightly, bringing herself into a space for the first time since the conversation began. "Figure of speech to whom, Mr. President? The people who showed up at our offices with threats, the ones who called our families at 3 a.m? Who decided your words were just words when they became someone's living nightmare?" The air in the room changes as the full weight of her words lands like a physical impact. Everyone in the room, security, aides, the few reporters allowed to witness this, feels the shift. This isn't a political discussion anymore. This is accountability arriving with force. Security cameras capture everything, recording history as it unfolds. This is about to transform into something that will redefine what political confrontation looks like in the modern era. The rhythm of power has changed, and everyone in the room knows it. A brief hesitation crosses Trump's face like a shadow passing over water, almost imperceptible, but impossible to miss once you've been looking for it. For just a second, the carefully constructed mask of confidence slips, revealing uncertainty beneath. Then he's back, blustering and aggressive, but the damage has been done. "I never told anyone to hurt anyone," he says, his voice rising with the desperation of someone who's realized they're losing control of the narrative. "Never, that's ridiculous. I've always been about bringing people together, about making America great again through peaceful means." But Crockett has already found the seam in his armor, that thin line where his words and actions don't match. She leans forward even further now, her voice dropping to that dangerous quiet tone that only emerges when someone is about to deliver a devastating blow that cannot be avoided. "You told them to fight like hell or they won't have a country anymore. You called them patriots while they threatened our lives. You made it about survival, about America's future." The rhythm of questioning accelerates now, each word building toward an unavoidable corner that he's been backing himself into since this conversation began. Trump opens his mouth to respond, to deflect, to attack, anything to regain control, but she continues without breaking stride, cutting him off without raising her voice. "You created a situation where disagreement became a death threat, where political opposition became personal danger, where serving your country meant risking your family's safety. You made us targets, Mr. President, and then pretended you didn't see us getting shot at." Trump's defense comes out almost as a whine, the authoritative voice of the presidency stripped away to reveal something smaller, more desperate. "That's not what I meant," he says, and for a moment he sounds like a child caught in a lie, hoping the adults in the room will believe his explanation. But the words feel hollow now, defensive in a way that only makes her point more devastating, more unassailable. The ground he thought was solid beneath his feet has turned to quicksand, and every word he speaks sinks him deeper into the truth he's been trying to avoid. The room watches as the presidency itself seems to collapse inward, leaving behind only the man who never learned to accept responsibility for the consequences of his choices. "Those were just words," Trump shoots back, rising from his chair with explosive energy that suggests he's lost all control of the situation. His voice cracks with the strain of maintaining the lie, cracking like ice under pressure. The familiar pattern kicks in. Deflect, deny, attack, deflect, deny, attack. But his rising volume only betrays the growing crack in his defense like a fault line showing its true depth. The transformation is dramatic and immediate. The man who built his career on verbal destruction finds himself destroyed by verbal precision. Crockett doesn't flinch from his rising energy. If anything, she seems to feed off it. She stands too, meeting his physical and emotional intensity with her own calm but fierce determination. "When leaders promote hate, hate shows up, sometimes right at our door," she says. The words hit with force because they're unassailable truth, facts that exist independent of political spin or media manipulation. "You can't escape the consequences of your choices, Mr. President. You made yourself the voice of anger, and anger doesn't stay contained to the rallies." Peak tension fills the room like a pressure cooker about to blow. Every person present feeling the weight of history in the making. Trump's face reddens as he searches desperately for the counterattack that won't come. The perfect deflection that doesn't exist. The man who prides himself on destroying opponents finds himself destroyed by someone who refuses to be destroyed by anyone. "You can't blame me for crazy people," he shouts, his voice echoing off the walls of the office. But the room feels the devastating impact of her direct challenge to his leadership. His words bounce back at him, hollow and empty, revealing their complete lack of substance. Crockett's response comes in a whisper that somehow carries more power than his shouted defense. "I'm not blaming you for being crazy, Mr. President. I'm blaming you for being a leader who thinks responsibility ends where convenience begins. I'm blaming you for making it acceptable to hate. I'm blaming you for turning disagreement into warfare." The weight of her words settles over him like a physical thing. And for the first time in the conversation, Trump looks like what he is. A man facing consequences he's spent his entire life avoiding. The room holds its breath, waiting for the next move in a chess game where the pieces have suddenly rearranged themselves on the board. Silence fills the space as Crockett delivers the devastating line that will define everything that follows. The words hang in the air, like a challenge to everything he's built his entire response around, like a loaded gun pointed directly at the heart of his carefully constructed denial. You're putting a literal target on our backs. The reversal moment hits like lightning, striking the same place twice. Power shifts completely as she names the consequence he's been avoiding, the price he's refused to acknowledge. The bill that's come due for years of rhetoric designed to inflame rather than unite. His mouth opens, closes, opens again. Nothing comes out. The words seem to evaporate before they can form. For the first time in the conversation, Trump looks genuinely stunned, like someone who's been slapped with a reality they never considered. The silence stretches between them like a canyon, growing wider with each passing second. Security teams shift nervously in their positions, professional instincts warning them that they're witnessing something unprecedented. Someone somewhere is recording this, and they all know it. The cameras may have stopped, the official record may be closed, but this moment will define everything that follows. This is the moment that will be quoted by historians, analyzed by political scientists, dissected by media for decades to come. Crockett continues speaking, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of lived experience, the authority of someone who has faced the consequences of his choices firsthand. You can call it figure of speech. You can say you didn't mean it. You can blame the media, blame your enemies, blame anyone you want. But it doesn't change what it did. It doesn't change who's afraid. It doesn't change who's threatened. Trump stammers something about fake news, about media bias, about unfair coverage, but the words feel like ash in his mouth. Everyone in the room knows the truth when they hear it, recognizes the unassailable nature of accountability when it finally arrives uninvited and uncompromising. This is what accountability looks like when it finally arrives, isn't it, Mr. President? She asks, not waiting for an answer because she knows she won't get one. It looks like a woman who refused to be silenced. It looks like the truth spoken out loud in a room full of people who forgot what that sounds like. The revelation hangs in the air like smoke after an explosion, settling into every corner of the room, transforming the very nature of the space itself. This isn't a political confrontation anymore. This is history in the making, truth arriving with the force of a meteor impact. Trump attempts a recovery, his voice rising to familiar aggression levels, the presidential voice that has intimidated countless opponents in the past. I'm not threatening anyone. I never threatened anyone. But his words feel hollow now, defensive in a way that only makes Crockett's point more devastating, more inescapable. The counterattack collapses under the weight of reality like a house of cards in a hurricane. The attempt at damage control only makes the situation worse. Everything he says seems to dig him deeper into the hole he's been creating since this conversation began. His defense mechanisms, so effective against political opponents, crumble when faced with moral authority wielded by someone who refuses to be intimidated. Crockett's response carries the precision of someone who's mapped every word, every reaction, every moment of this confrontation like a chess grandmaster plotting moves 5 steps ahead. When political leaders spread hate and lies don't stay in the headlines where they can be ignored. They don't remain abstract concepts that exist only in the media. They come to our offices. They come to our homes. They come to our families. The decisive moment arrives like inevitability itself, unavoidable, and total in its impact. His attempt at deflection only strengthens her argument, makes her point more devastating, more irrefutable. The man who prides himself on destroying opponents finds himself destroyed by someone who refuses to be destroyed by anyone, whose courage only grows stronger when faced with aggression. You want to talk about threats? Crockett's voice cuts through his sputtering protest like a blade through rope, precise and devastating. Tell that to the mothers who can't sleep because their kids are afraid to go to school. Tell that to the families who get death threats for doing their jobs. Tell that to the people who trusted their leader not to make them targets. Each word lands with the force of a physical blow, accumulating like weight on a scale until his defense becomes completely untenable. The room watches as the presidency itself seems to collapse inward, leaving behind only the man who never learned to accept responsibility for the consequences of his choices. Trump sits back down heavily, the fight going out of him like air from a punctured tire. His shoulders slump forward, the bluster draining away like water through a crack. For just a moment, he looks like what he is, a man facing consequences he spent his entire life avoiding. Someone who has finally encountered a force he cannot intimidate or manipulate. His words, when they finally come, are barely a whisper that might not even be audible to the recording devices in the room. That's not. But she doesn't let him finish the sentence. She doesn't need to. The room knows what he's trying to say, and the room knows why he can't complete the thought. The counterattack has failed completely, leaving him more exposed and vulnerable than when the conversation began. The facade finally cracks, not dramatically, not with theater or the kind of spectacle that might have salvaged something from the wreckage. It just breaks, like something brittle that finally meets its limit, like ice that has been heated beyond its capacity to maintain its form. Crockett delivers the final blow with the quiet authority of someone who's never needed volume to be heard, whose strength has always come from substance rather than style. I will not be intimidated. I will not be silenced. And I will not let you pretend that words don't have consequences. The final power shift hits like a physical force, overwhelming and complete in its impact. The hierarchy of fear reverses completely, instantaneously, and permanently. From president to constituent, from leader to follower, from predator to prey, every single power dynamic in the room has been turned upside down. The room feels it like an earthquake, everyone present understanding that they've just witnessed something that changes everything. Trump's shoulders slump even further forward. The carefully maintained posture of authority that has defined his public presence crumbles like an ancient building whose foundations have been undermined. The bluster drains away completely, leaving behind only the man who never learned that true leadership requires accepting responsibility for the consequences of the choices you make. Security details stationed around the room realize they're not protecting the president anymore. They're just watching two people have a conversation, one of whom has just redefined what courage looks like in a room where courage matters most. The power differential that defined their positions from the beginning has been completely eliminated by someone who refused to let it define her response. The confrontation isn't over. It's reached its conclusion. But the implications of what just happened will ripple outward like waves from a stone thrown into still water, changing everything that comes after. Trump looks around the room searching for some sign that this isn't really happening, some indication that the rules haven't changed, that his authority remains intact. But he sees only faces that reflect the same reality he can't escape. He has just been defeated by someone whose weapon was truth and whose armor was integrity. The collapse is total and complete, not just of his defense, but of the entire persona he's built his life around. In the space of a single conversation, everything he thought he knew about power, about leadership, about the rules of political combat has been turned upside down. The man sits in his chair like someone who has just realized their entire world was built on quicksand. As the confrontation ends, the weight of what's been said settles over the room like dust after an explosion, like the quiet that follows thunder. The cost of political rhetoric has been counted in the currency of human safety, and someone has finally demanded payment in full, refusing to accept anything less than complete accountability. The silence isn't empty, it's heavy with implications, weighted with the knowledge that everything has changed. The cameras stopped rolling when the conversation officially ended, but the truth they captured will keep rolling forever, spreading outward like ripples in an infinite pond. Crockett gathers her materials with the same steady hands that delivered each devastating question throughout the encounter. No triumph, no celebration, no satisfaction beyond the quiet knowledge that she's done what needed to be done. Just the measured movements of someone who knows exactly what she did and why she did it, whose sense of duty outweighed her personal safety. The room empties slowly, each person carrying the weight of what they witnessed, understanding that they're now part of something that will be analyzed and discussed for years to come. The witnesses to this conversation will spend the rest of their lives trying to explain to people who weren't there what it felt like to watch truth confront power and win decisively. This isn't just about politics anymore. It's about the fundamental question of what leadership means in an age where words have consequences that extend far beyond the arena of public discourse. It's about the difference between leadership and demagoguery, between inspiration and manipulation, between courage and cowardice. It's about what happens when someone finally says enough, when the accumulated weight of threats and intimidation finally meets someone whose sense of justice outweighs her fear. It's about the moment when silence becomes complicity and speaking becomes an act of rebellion against the forces that seek to silence truth. And in the silence that follows, as the last people leave the room and the reality of what just happened settles over everything like snow covering a landscape, one thing becomes crystal clear. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be silenced. Refuse to accept the premise that power means the right to inflict fear on those who disagree. The echo of those words, the ones about not being intimidated, about not being silenced, about holding power accountable, will outlive all of them. They will reverberate through history like the sound of a bell that marks the end of one era and the beginning of another. In the end, this conversation has become more than a political confrontation. It's become a defining moment, a point of reference that will be used to measure all future acts of political courage. The standard has been set, the bar has been raised, and everyone who witnesses this moment will remember it for the rest of their lives. The truth was spoken, the price was paid, and the world was changed. In the aftermath of confrontation, truth sits heavy in the room like dust after an explosion. The cost of political rhetoric has been counted in human currency, and someone finally demanded payment in full. Leadership isn't measured by the size of your crowd or the volume of your voice. It's measured by the responsibility you accept for what they become. When the echo of our words outlives our intentions, who bears the responsibility for what they become? What legacy do we leave when silence becomes survival and courage means accepting the cost of accountability? When leaders make their followers targets, who decides the price of following? Should politicians be held accountable for the violent actions of those who claim to act on their behalf? Or are words always just words?